All right, episode 3. I don't know, Ryan. How are we to episode 3 already? It seems like the weeks are just flying by right now, but
I know. I'm like I'm hoping for Thanksgiving. That's usually like my finish line, as far as just the mental part of the season. But just like we talked about, it's getting closer to renovation season, overseeding season, and that fall is truly the start of getting started for next year. That's really the beginning point. So probably a good idea that we talk about more of that today and a little bit more in depth next steps of where we left off last week.
yep. So we'd like to talk about some questions that kind of came in on YouTube, and then also we would like to talk about the renovation steps and how that kind of looks in terms of we did all of our preparation in our last episode, and then now what are the actual steps and how do you actually get things completed. So yeah, how have things been going out where you are as far as anything cooling down for you guys?
Yesterday was probably the first day in a long, long time, a couple months at least, that it rained pretty much all day here, off and on, some drizzles, some shower, but we had probably, I'd say, 6 to 8 hours of rain, not much, under a half an inch, but it was good to see a nice low soaking rain, albeit not much. But and it's a little cooler here today. The cold fronts passed through, and things are shaping up. So it's you're definitely seeing what was just drought stressed and what is actually damaged from whether it be all the heat that we had or insect pests, diseases, all that kind of stuff. So that's what I'm expecting to see now is as we get a little bit more soil moisture out there on some of the unirrigated stuff, you're going to know what's what here pretty quickly and probably have to think about either renovating or overseeding if you've got some dead grass out there.
Yep, I was over at my neighbor's yesterday doing some of his actual leveling renovation stuff, and it got that little bit of glimpse of fall, with the north breeze and the low humidity, and I was like, yes, this is coming finally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not soon enough.
Yep, that's true. It's been pretty tough summer this year for us all, I think.
Yeah, no doubt. But I mean, that's where it goes every year. We have a bad spring but an easy summer, or vice versa. I can only think of 2 or so years in the last 20 or so that I can really remember growing grass that were from start to finish were just incredibly simple and straightforward.
Yep.
So that's part of what we do and why we do it is to deal with the unexpected and handle the problems and challenges that come up
Yep.
the best we can.
Yep. So let's get to some listener questions here right off the bat. I tried to grab a couple. There's actually quite a few in there that we probably need to go in and try to respond to a few more.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
as far as that goes, let's go to the first one here that I grabbed. And this said, I like to hear his thoughts. I'm assuming that's you, Ryan, on whether or not to aerate before sand leveling. I can see how it could improve the flow of water and oxygen, so I don't really see a downside. Also, would aerating a bluegrass lawn before overseeding help improve germination?
So that's two different questions there. So let's start with aerating before sand leveling. I do believe in that for the simple fact that maintaining that interface, right? So we've got, a soil layer and then a sand layer on top. And we're not going to get into the whole concrete debate. That's an entirely separate issue. But I do believe that in managing that interface and allowing water to come down, you don't want to create a bathtub if you can help it. But I do know that some of it might not be practical in some situations. So I think doing that, once you do the sand cap though, and once you start leveling with sand, you've now committed yourself to only top dressing with sand from that point forward. And the reason being is if you do pull a core and you do break that up with a mower or a drag mat or something like that, and now we've got finer textured soil over coarser textured soil. So we've got our native soil base, we've got our sand cap that we put on top to level, and now we've got this thin layer of dirt and soil mixed together, or dirt and sand mixed together. That could create some issues.
Mm-hmm.
So you're probably in a solid tine only situation where we're not trying to pull cores, we're just trying to poke holes. And so that's kind of going forward the next steps of how I would look at that. But there is no downside.
And
Just
then
make sure that you
going
understand that.
going forward, could you, if you core aerated after that, you would basically just have to collect those clippings and then put the sand down again.
Correct. You'd be collecting all those cores and just putting that down. So I think somebody on the lawn Discord just did that, and it looked rather intense.
Yeah. Yep.
Rather intense, especially if you're not the machinery like we would on a golf course or a sports field to do something like that. So I think the other part of the question, aerating a bluegrass lawn before overseeding, would it help improve germination? It definitely would in the holes, because you're going to have more porosity, more airspace, space for water to infiltrate and get in there too. So in that case, you're going to see a benefit there. And I think we might talk a little bit about aeration today. So we'll kind of go over a little bit more of how impactful that is, but it would help. And maybe we can quantify that a little bit here as we go through stuff.
Okay. Second question is, love the show, want to reseed and do a little reno, but am overrun with creeping Charlie in some areas. Do I have to wait till it's cooler to kill that? If I have to wait, then do I lose my reseeding window opportunity? Lastly, what if I wanted to core aerate and then incorporate seed? So again, a little bit about aeration there, but
yeah, the aeration and seed thing is fine. I think it's really important how you the sequence in which you follow there, and then also the methods and tools that you use to do that. So again, we'll definitely get into that through our video here. But as far as the creeping Charlie goes, I don't know where this person is, but assuming that you're under 85 or so during the day, and even if you have to spray in the morning time when it's a little bit cooler, triclopyr is your best bet. So 32 fluid ounces to the acre, so about 0.75 fluid ounces per thousand. Check your label to be sure on your product, but go ahead and spray that out, and that will take care of your creeping Charlie. And again, shouldn't have any major issues as long as you're below 85. And I can't remember the reseed interval on that product exactly, but check the label to be sure. Should be less than 30 days.
yeah, I think I've used T-zone before, but you don't want to mess around too much with that in the heat. So
No, yeah. Again, spray early if you're going to spray, and try to time it up with, especially if you're in the Midwest, we've got some cooler temperatures coming next week. So have your product ready and be ready to go.
Mm-hmm. Next question is, curious, what about soil that has disease or fungus? Would it be killed off with glyphosate and then fine to be reseeded, or does the soil need to be removed? I have fairy ring in one area.
Yeah, so with fairy ring, glyphosate's not going to do anything to that. So that's a soil-borne fungus that you can manage it in a couple of different ways, and you can use fungicides as a drench application. So not just spraying them with your little backpack sprayer, or I wouldn't recommend using a hose and sprayer, but it's a high volume, very targeted application to combat those things. The other way to manage it is just strictly through color. So try to even out, if it's a type 1 or type 2. So there's different types of fairy ring that one is basically destructive to turf. You're going to see dead spots and dead rings. And then the other one causes it to be more green. So if you have the type that causes it to be more green, you can kind of balance out color a little bit more with iron or nitrogen, things like that, and manage through it. But to the question there, removing it is the only true way to do it. Glyphosate won't do anything for that.
Okay. And this question is kind of a funny one. So, what grass cultivar is a Taurus SHO? Because we were talking last week about a little bit about Tauruses versus Mustangs in terms of grass seeds and cultivars and fun stuff like that.
That is a clever question. Now, so for the listeners that don't know what the Taurus SHO is, that's the special high output Taurus. Okay, so this is going to be the guy who probably owned a Mustang, or gal that owned a Mustang previously. Life happened. Maybe you got a couple of kids. Maybe you just got more crap you got to haul around now, but you still want to have a little bit of power and speed. So, in the grass sense, these are not the, the super high-end elite cultivars. There may be a notch below that and a little bit more forgiving blend where maybe they have, they don't look as deep and dark green, but they've got better disease resistance or better drought tolerance or things like that, to where, you can let them go a little bit, but you still want to be able to party and look good when you need to. So that would be, in a lot of senses. I know locally here, there's a couple of seed blenders that they have, the super elite and the sod quality type stuff. And then just one notch below that, they have like a bluegrass blend or a tall fescue blend that is in that market. So I would definitely talk to sod farms in your area. Those are usually a good resource to kind of bounce things off of, because they've got to grow for different price points. They've got to grow for the ultra high end folks in the pro market, and they've also got to be able to grow for builders, homeowners, things like that. So they know those differences in the strata, so to speak, of the different seeds and what you can get out of them. But yeah, if you, like I said, it's like a Mustang, but it's got 4 doors and it looks a little bit more dorky. So that's what the Taurus HSO is.
Yeah, I was thinking of it more as some kind of sleeper a little bit. Just one of those. It's not going to be a super fast car, but it's still going to be come up to a light and you see a Taurus and you're probably thinking anything can blow the doors off, but it's a bit of a sleeper. So
yeah.
All right, one last question. This came from our little group of lawn nerds, Ryan, that we are a part of. But they wanted to know what grass you have at home, and are you tired of grass by the time you get home every day? So do you take care of it, or do you just sort of let it sort of be
So I wouldn't say but I don't put a ton of effort into it, just because coming from the golf side, I've always tried to push things to their limit. So I like drying stuff down as far as I can get it. I like, understanding thresholds of populations for weeds and diseases and things like that. So what I like to do is, and what I've got in my yard right now is Barenbrug HDT, Kentucky Bluegrass. And that area there, it's basically just planting super elite varieties and then just beating the snot out of them and seeing how far you can take it. Because every time, I have somebody say, oh, this is, the best stuff out there, but, and I always ask, well, what does it look like at its worst? If you take all the makeup off, what does it really look like? And so, to your old profession, it's kind of like, anybody can sound good in the studio, right? But when you put them live in front of a crowd, you can really sort out who's a good musician and a good artist versus, somebody who's not. So that's kind of where I come from, is I like to beat up those varieties. And then my backyard is just whatever it is. I do, I don't necessarily subscribe to the whole organic lawn thing, but I do think it's interesting to kind of study in culture and look at, in a place where it's quote unquote safe for me to do that, how different things interact and where I can do to control those in a different way. Because there is a lot of pressure, especially, like Parks and Rec and school districts and things like that, to take those traditional or conventional treatments out of the loop and put in something that might be a little bit more environmentally sensitive or whatever. And so I try to do that here in the backyard and use that as an experiment for things. And there's times it looks really good and there's times it looks awful, and that's okay with me. So I just like I like being able to mess around with stuff in a space that won't get me fired.
I think that's kind of what I have found too, is for the most part, area inside of my fence in the last few years, or that area kind of outside there closer to the creek, if you ever watch any of my videos, that was sort of what I was trying to do, is just limit a lot of things, see what would work, what wouldn't work, and using some more organic based stuff. But I get a lot of questions from Canadians, and I actually just responded to one a couple days ago that I got an email from, and he was like, can you please show us an area that you don't really treat with a whole bunch of stuff, because we can't get anything up here, and I want to know what it would look like. I was like, well, I'm pretty much doing that right now outside the fence, and like 4 applications a year of fertilizer. It doesn't look good in the summer. There's weeds coming in. There's different things. I don't use any pre-emergent. Does it look okay? Yeah. Is it like the rest of my yard or any of the higher end areas? No, it doesn't really look the same. But
yeah, and I think that's a fair thing to do. I think it's always good to have an area, even if it's just a small spot, that if we're talking about treatments and fertilizers and control products and all that kind of stuff, is even if it's as small as like a shoebox, and you cover something up every time you spray and fertilize, just so you've got sort of a reference point of, if I didn't do any of this, this is what it would look like. So in the pro side, that helps me a lot to show clients and stakeholders and like that, why they spend as much as they do, or whether it be time or money, on taking care of fields and whatnot. But it can also help you in your home situation. You could leave that little shoebox size piece untreated and show your significant other or your neighbor, whoever, your YouTube followers, and say, if I didn't do this, this is what it would look like. And I think that's always a really powerful statement, just to know, what the difference is. So,
Yep. Yeah, that's what I think too. And it comes back to our talk last week of expectations too. And some people
absolutely.
aren't as, crazy about having the high end everything. So some of it's good for them. And if you're okay with our climate in summer, kind of letting things just be what they are and then getting back to a really nice yard in spring and fall, I think that's definitely doable for pretty much anybody with not really that many inputs into it.
For sure. I think that's a good topic for us, as we get into maybe the off season, is just how do we frame and set expectations in a multitude of different levels. But there's a process that I've kind of learned to jump into any situation, whether it's the people that can't rub together two nickels, all the way to a person who's got the blank checkbook. And money's important, but I think setting those expectations first will help guide how you spend that money, no matter how much it is. So that'd be a good topic going forward. But hey, it's beautiful out here. It's beginning of August, so let's talk about renovation.
Let's do it. So I think today we wanted to cover the actual renovation steps, and I'm interested to hear some of your experience because you have a lot of different projects that you've worked on, from field or sports turf to regulars. I'm doing homeowner stuff, so I think kind of blending those two together and having a chat about it should be a bit interesting. But I wanted to say off the bat was that I do have a couple of playlists the last couple years that I've done basically step by step, and they're a little bit different because last year, we'll talk about this too, I had a more sloped area that I did, and Ryan and I had a discussion about that, and he's like, you need this blanket and you need it right now before you spend all this money and then it goes down the drain, which it would have, which we can talk about too. But so I think there's a couple playlists there if you're interested in learning, step by step and seeing it. And then having this discussion today, I think will help a lot of people to understand the steps and how that goes.
No doubt, and I've watched those videos too. I think they're very informative, and I think having being able to have a reference point to go back to and say, okay, they said this and I didn't quite understand it. So use that, if you're listening right now, use that to your advantage, to help you understand what we're talking about. If you have questions, and certainly feel free to post in the comments, and we'd be glad to answer.
Mm-hmm. So let's go over the full renovation steps first. I think we'll talk about overseeding a bit too, because I have a few questions that I get from people all the time on the overseeding process that I'd like to ask you about. But as far as full renovation, we talked about it last week. Get started with your method of removing the existing turf sooner rather than later. It takes probably more time than people think. So that's where to start.
Yeah, I think from spraying out and starting there. We talked a little bit about that last week, but so we're what we call following, FALLOW, following the ground to make sure that there's no other weeds or anything else that comes up, nothing comes back, and then at that point we're removing vegetation. And there's a couple of different ways that we can do that. We could take a sod cutter and take all that stuff out. Now that's pretty cumbersome. There's some advantages and disadvantages to that. But probably the most tried and true method, and I guess the most straightforward method, is scalping. So we're just going to set that mower down, and you don't want to bite off everything all at once. You might have to step it down over the course of 3, 4, 5 mowings. But to take that stuff down and get it as low as that you possibly can, and remove all those clippings. It's a really important step. I've seen people fail at that one critical step where they leave all that vegetation, that dead vegetation, out there on the surface, and they try to seed into it and nothing happens. And so that dead, decaying plant material is not going to be a conducive environment for growing stuff in. Now, what's left, and what's the stems and those plant parts that are left above ground, they sort of act as like a mulch in a sense, and that helps out a little bit. But we want to get that stuff out of there. So after that, we talked about last time about leveling, and whether that's going to be a sand leveling to correct some small minor grade issues, or if that means bringing in soil or moving soil within the property to correct any grade issues, unevenness, anything like that, any terrain issues that we want to take care of ahead of seeding. And I'll tell you, we talked a little bit about it last time, but this is your chance. This is your chance to correct any issues that you have as far as grade goes. And I really, really encourage people to take advantage of it. It's really easy to say, I don't have the time to do it. Make the time, because that's going to make a big difference. In the way that the lawn looks and maintains. I mean, what have you seen? You've leveled more lawns than I have. I've leveled all sorts of things, but in the lawn sense, have you seen some horror stories of people that skipped that step and paid for it in the end?
Yeah, well, I think that I was just talking about this with my neighbor last night when we were leveling some of his yard, and I was just thinking that same exact thing that I needed to reiterate on video was just you have this one opportunity when everything is a blank, slate at that point, and you can just really take that time. I know it might cost a little bit of money if you need to bring in some soil. It's going to cost some work, but man, it's a good opportunity to really take that advantage of starting over. There's not a lot of great ways if you're not going to go low with turf. I feel like in the future to really add soil or something else and fix things, as well as just when you're doing that full renovation, it's really the time to get that done. And so I was kind of reiterating that point to him that this is in my opinion the best way to really change the levelness of your yard at this point and have some great results.
Yeah, and that goes from everything from, the simplest things like mowing and not, you're going down and you have that little dip that you always scalp when you come back up the hill or something like that, all the way to areas that are, holding more water and during times of, heavy rains or, over irrigation or something like that, and those turn into disease hotspots. So again, it's going to cost you more money and more heartache over time than it would to take care of those issues ahead of time. And if it's if you can't afford to fix it right, I would strongly encourage you to think about maybe waiting, and maybe this isn't the year, and you kind of play defense and get ready for next year if it's too much soil for you to pay for right now or something like that. But try and make that money count, make that time investment count, and do yourself a favor, because it will definitely pay off in the long run. So the once we get that done, as far as level surface, I think we're going to talk a little bit about using Tenacity versus not using Tenacity, which is a pre and post emergent herbicide that'll effectively, it's going to help you with a couple of things. One, especially in a fall seeding, is emergence of weeds that are winter annual, so they germinate in the fall and come up. And the most prevalent one that we're concerned about the most is Poa annua, so annual bluegrass. And so Tenacity is relatively effective as a pre-emergent against that. There's some really good work out of Rutgers University, where they looked at this over the course of a couple, 2-3 years going forward. And what they found is that it actually, its efficacy was reduced in subsequent years. So the best year it worked was the first year. So, taking advantage of something like that when you're seeding, especially if you're doing, high-end elite cultivars and you don't want to have that contamination, or at least you want to delay that contamination because it's going to happen. It's inevitable. It's a really good tool to be able to use. So, and then seeding, we're going to talk about some methods with that, as far as getting that stuff in the ground, how it needs to go in, and differences between species there. So, differences between rye versus tall fescue versus bluegrass. And then I think just getting that stuff either raked and or rolled in, that's a really, really key part. So making sure that we have seed to soil contact and making sure that the seed is evenly distributed, all that sort of stuff is a really key component. And then we're going to do our fertilizer, our starter fertilizer, and water at that point. And at that point, it's just about managing moisture. Yep. And we'll definitely talk about that. So
one part there, I think too, on that, going all the way back to after you scalp, that I have found is on that first renovation that I did on the side yard, I had a pretty thick turf there already. So by the time that I scalped, there still just was a lot of material there to where I really couldn't see down to the soil very well. And I've set my mower as low as it would go, but an 1.25 inches is still quite a bit of stuff there. So I found that actually getting sort of a dethatcher or scarifier in there and removing some of that material really helped me too, because I want to see an area where I know the seed is getting down to the soil and it's not just sitting on top of a canopy of a bunch of dead stuff.
Absolutely. I mean, you should see soil. You should see your dead plant part sticking up out of the ground and then soil underneath. So, and again, probably looking at your videos would definitely help paint that picture a little bit better. But for folks that, if you're wondering, did I rake up enough or did I collect enough? I've always found that even in a dense turf, like you got to go back and rake it or blow it off. I've done both. Where I've loosened up that stuff that gets mashed in after you mow. And even if you're bagging and collecting all those clippings, there's still that layer of stuff. So whether it's loosening up with a rake, if you've got a larger lawn, there's different attachments that you can get, like a dethatching rake or one of the electric or gas powered dethatchers, I think like you're talking about, Ryan.
Mm-hmm.
And from there, it's just about removing that material. So if you're going to blow it up into windrows and then collect it and put it in lawn bags or haul it off somewhere, something like that, it's a really important part of the process to get rid of all that stuff and be down to just some dead plant parts sticking up out of the ground and then bare soil.
Yeah, and it's not too difficult. Honestly, it's kind of a dirty job, but it's really, once that grass is dead, it pretty much comes out of there pretty easily at that point.
Yeah, no doubt.
So I think we should touch a bit on tenacity and sort of the when should you use it, or should anybody go and think about not using it? I mean, what would be?
So I don't know if there's anybody that doesn't benefit from using it in a cool season setting. It's I consider it to be like a rider on your insurance policy. When you were doing an insurance policy and they say, oh, you want, do you want vacation coverage on your homeowner's policy or something, weird stuff that they ask you like that. And you're like, no, I don't think I'll ever have a problem. It's the same thing when you're seeding. It's an easy thing to pass over and say, well, I just killed everything. I'm not going to get POA. I really don't have to worry about that. I should be fine. And again, for the money, what you're going to spend, I think it's a really, really valuable tool. So the interesting thing about it in particular, as far as a homeowner's concerned, there's two different formulations. So they have the regular liquid formulation that's made by Syngenta and is sold in 8-ounce bottles. So that 8-ounce bottle will spray basically half an acre at the full rate that you can do in a year, which you wouldn't use that necessarily all the way through fall on an overseeding. So that, you're talking, maybe $65, $75, something like that, depending where you get it from. And then the alternative there, if you don't have that much area to cover. So let's just say, your lawn is 5,000 square feet. Well, if I do 3 apps at 4 ounces to the acre, and that's to the acre, so that's a very, very small amount over 5,000 square feet 3 times. You've got a lot left over. So are you going to use that or are you not? So the folks that make the technical material for Tenacity, which is a chemical called mesotrione, they took that to another company and basically said, hey, can we impregnate this on fertilizer, and specifically starter fertilizer, to use as sort of a one-step process. And so you can buy that product now. I believe they sell it in big box, in smaller bags, in like 18-pound bags. I believe Scott's.
I think Scott's has it. Yep.
Scott's has that, and then you can get a pro product from the Andersons, which is a 40-pound bag, and those bags are going to run. They vary a little bit more widely, but somewhere between like $50 and $80. And so that bag, I believe, covers, if I want to, don't quote me, but I want to say about 9,000 square feet. So those are sort of the differences. I mean, you're going to pay obviously a little bit more per unit area with a lot more really with the unit area on the granular product, but it's a one-stop shop. You put that stuff down and you've got your starter out and you've got your tenacity out as well. There's some concerns there with the formulation as far as if a granular is as effective as a liquid in that specific situation. There's definitely going to be a little bit of a reduction in efficacy when it comes to using a product like that. And the pearls are really small. I mean, the pearls are probably, if folks here are familiar with there's a system they use for sizing fertilizer called size guide number, SGN. So a typical Site 1 fertilizer might be 200 SGN. This stuff is going to be like 100 SGN. So this is small enough that a golf course superintendent would put it on greens and it would fall in between the foliage there. So very, very small particles. So you get better coverage as far as, per square inch, but it's still not comparable to spraying a liquid out of a properly calibrated sprayer. So
Yeah, and that comes down
just,
to, I think, the sprayer part there too, because you need to be pretty comfortable with spraying. I feel like, not just to use a term, all willy nilly out there, just kind of going crazy, but
yeah,
so that I think the question that I get from a lot of homeowners as far as using Tenacity is just their comfort level with the spraying, or do they own the equipment? And that's where I think that granular probably would be better than doing nothing at all.
yeah, the point of entry or the barrier to entry on the granular product is much lower, right? However, it's just as important, and I know that you know this, but for everybody who's listening, it's just as important to make sure that that is
Mm-hmm.
properly calibrated as well. So there's trade-offs in all of this, and every single thing that we're going to talk about today, there's trade-offs. But that's one piece that, for the money, it's worth adding in there to give you a little bit of benefit. And there's other winter annuals too that can pop up. It's not just POA annual, but there's other things that can jump up and get you. You're not going to have to worry about the summer annuals like crabgrass and goosegrass and foxtail, things like that. But you do need to make sure that you're on point for those winter annuals as they start to germinate in,
Yep.
say, August.
How important do you think then is the starter fertilizer and getting that down when you're growing seed?
It's if you've got ample phosphorus in your soil, and this is why it's important to soil test. My answer is generally it's not as important. If you are lower in phosphorus, and even in a higher pH situation where phosphorus might not be as available, those are things that I would look to and say, okay, hey, we might need to make a supplemental phosphorus application here as a starter fertilizer. And the reason being is those younger plants, those seedlings, when they first come up, they're going to be hungry for phosphorus. It's a critical part in the physiological development of the plant. And with those being young plants, they don't have a ton of energy to go and in physical structures yet, really, to push out and use their own plant exudates and things like that to take up phosphorus that might be in inorganic forms around them. So in a mature stand of turf, those roots are able to exude certain chemicals that balance pH or allow the plant to take up phosphorus, even at very, very low levels. Seedlings don't necessarily have that same capability just because their younger plants are not fully developed. And so that's why having that out there is a crucial step if you're low or if you have high pH. So those are the situations where I would consider it, but absolutely 100% do a soil test because that's going to tell you everything you need to know.
Mm-hmm. So the other question I think that I get a lot is, where does core aeration fit into the full renovation process? Is it something that should be added? When would it be added? Those are the questions I think I see a lot of times.
In general, it's a good practice. And you're going to have folks that say it's going to bring up weed seeds. It's going to do all this stuff. In my take is, we have tools to control most any weed that we face in a cool season situation with with a few mainly being Poa annua, Poa trivialis, a couple other ones that are difficult to control, if not impossible, without just non-selective herbicide. That said, um, I feel more confident about that and controlling those than I do about any other better way to get oxygen into my root zone. All right, so that's sort of the give and take there. Now the reality is that the types of aerators that we use in home lawns. So you'll see those ones you can get at the rental yard or Home Depot or something like that. And those, while they're effective and it's doing something, we would like to see in a pro turf setting, we would like to see at a maximum about 20% of the surface area disrupted with aeration every year. On the low side, maybe as low as 5% on some areas like, a fairway or a sports field that's not used quite as much. So that displacement needs to go up as, traffic and everything goes up as well. So depending on your type of lawn and what you've got going on, that's how you would gauge that 5 to say 20%. These rental yard units are going to give you somewhere in the order of like 2 or 3% at a time, maybe, depending on their spacing. And so it's really one of those things of, is that enough? Can you do it? Can you go over it twice? And what's that going to do to your seed bed? Can you go over it 3 times? What's that going to do to your seed bed? So I think there's a place for it, and you're going to see enhanced germination and enhanced plant health inside where those aerification holes are, but that might only be, 3 to 8% of your entire lawn space. So I think it's a good practice, but you got to stay on a program. It's not just, I'm going to do it because I feel like it because we're renovating. I'm never going to do it again. I would try to get on that, well in advance of any renovations. But if you're here and you're now, it's not going to hurt anything per se.
Mm-hmm. I think I've done it pretty much both ways, where I have or have not done it and didn't really see a major difference in terms of the end results, just of the project itself. But yeah, the continuation of doing that over time and staying on a maintenance program is important.
Yeah, and that's really what it comes down to, is making the decision to make that part of a maintenance program and not just an aeration step, or excuse me, a renovation step by adding aeration. I think that's really the sort of the fork in the road that you have to take one way or the other.
Mm-hmm. So if they were doing leveling, would you probably put that before, or would you do in terms of the step?
Yeah, because if you go over, let's just say we've put, a couple yards of topsoil down an area and leveled it, even if it's, just a couple inches, when you take the aerator over that and disrupt that, it's going to, mess that grade up, or it could really screw things up. So I do that ahead of time and then put my topsoil on top of that.
Yep. That's what I did on my side yard. I actually did renovate. And the other part of it is that if your soil is if you've been watering but you haven't had much rain, and then your soil may not be all that soft at that point too, then those things like to really bounce around on top of the surface.
That's a great point. I mean, the integrity of that process, so to speak, right? So the conditions that are present for us to be able to do it, like we wouldn't go out and spread fertilizer in the rain. It's the same thing with aeration, where if it's bone dry and you could bounce a basketball, or play the Wimbledon final on your lawn, probably not a good time to take the aerator out there. Unless you're wearing a mouthpiece and a helmet, maybe that might be a good PPE.
Yeah. Well, let's shift a bit to the overseeding process then. Maybe what the differences are in terms of the steps. And, I get a lot of people on that. I have a couple overseeding videos that have done really well on YouTube, but a couple of them, people are always telling me, oh, that's never going to work. It has to be fully covered with something. And that's a step that I really have not fully done in the past. Usually I would kind of go through these same steps, like scalping it down, maybe thinning it out if I'm seeing that it's too thick, and then core aerating, and then putting seed on. And then after that, I mean, many times I've sort of just started watering at that point and not covered the actual yard with anything top dressing wise other than just what was laying there from aeration. And I've had perfectly fine results with that.
And I think you just hit the nail on the head as far as if you wanted to do the, what I would call the, keep it stupid simple, not keep it simple stupid, but just keep it stupid simple. And we're just going to whack this stuff down. We're going to throw seed out there. We're going to keep it watered, and here we go. That's it. So it can be that simple. And I feel like, yeah, you're right. I've seen that. I mean, I did a couple cultivars ago. I did a project just right here on my lawn like that, where it was just like, I didn't have a ton of time. I knew what I wanted to do. And I just wanted to add in an additional cultivar to what was already there. And so it was just, the only step I added was I sprayed PGR on the lawn first. So I sprayed it with Trinexin Pacethyl with T-Nex to slow it down, then scalped it, and then came back with the seed and just kept it watered. And yeah, it turned out fine. But I think even you've got folks that, do you get questions of folks that are like, I can't scalp, or I like what I have right now. I just want to kind of, interseed into what I've got and not necessarily like a full on overseed? Do you get those questions often?
Yeah, I mean, there's some of those. I think what we talked about last week was one of the, with bluegrass, is probably the most common question that I get, or that people
Yeah.
really like bluegrass and they just want to add more of it. But let's say they already have a great yard or a thick yard. Well, we talked about that. There's kind of some strategy there. Otherwise, that bluegrass that you're adding in has a really tough time competing against everything that's already doing well there.
Yeah, and the situation I see it in, quite honestly, a lot is um, tall fescue, where especially this year, we've been hammered with brown patch here in certain situations. Unirrigated stuff, like I said, we're finding out here pretty quick what did make it, what didn't make it, as far as drought and heat stress. So that's a situation where I don't want to beat the snot out of the lawn, and I've got to come back in with something because I've got dead spots to fill in a non-spreading or a bunch type grass. So those are situations where again, using tools and equipment at your disposal. So if there's smaller areas, working that up with like the little garden weasel or seeding tool is a good one. Alternatively, if you've got a large area and that whether it's a larger lawn or something like that, or just a more wide scale type of thing, those slice seeders can be effective in going into an existing stand. What you're giving up there in certain respects is the competition from a taller turf stand that's going to limit light. It's also going to compete for nutrients and water and things like that. So kind of have to hedge your bets there a little bit. And the one common mistake I see with folks when they do these what I would call interseedings without doing anything to the existing grass really is just put out way too much seed. Like they think they've got to overcompensate. And so I always try to err on the lighter side of the seeding rate and continue to build that up. So it might take a couple times to get there, whether that's 2 in the fall or a fall and a dormant seed, things like that. But, getting back to the overseeding where you're taking it down, you can cover it with the top dressing. I mean, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And even if it's a new seeding as well, there's, there are benefits and there are drawbacks, right? So what are you going to cover it with? So what you tell me, what are some of the typical materials that your followers and other folks in this space use as a top dressing for either an overseed or a new lawn situation?
Yeah, I think for me, it's obviously been one of the easiest things that I found success with would be peat moss.
Okay.
And there's some disadvantages to that in my experience too, because it doesn't stay in place very well if you get a pretty good rain. So you might see it just pretty much wash away, and that's kind of what it is. But if you can get it there, and you're at a point where it's not any extreme storms or anything happens, you get lucky like that, then I
Mm-hmm.
found that it does do pretty well for me. It holds a little extra moisture there, and wherever I've had it, and maybe on a bare spot and something washed off, I've always found the germination on that spot that had it to be better than the spot that didn't have anything covering it at all. Now, over
Mm-hmm.
time, I mean, you can always fix those little things. I don't think it's like the end of the world, but so that would be one. Two, I tried some of those straw, like with the tackifier mixes that they have out now.
Okay.
I've tried those before, and
How was that?
I found that it was difficult to get an even layer put down that didn't actually smother what you wanted to grow.
Yeah.
And so there's that, and then also just in general, like straw, people just taking like a straw bale and going crazy with that.
No, I think so. Everything that you just described, I mean, the disadvantage or the problem or the barrier with all this stuff, right, is distribution. How do I effectively spread straw without turning it into a mess? How do I spread the straw blanket with the tackifier without it being uneven? And the same goes for peat moss. I mean, they all have their disadvantages, and anything I tell you is going to have its own disadvantages as well. Um, as far as peat moss goes, I'm not a huge fan of it. And to be fair, used a ton of it. Um, probably 20 years or so ago, back when I was really first getting my start. Um, in leading projects and doing different things on the golf course and things like that, where on seeding projects, or we've got an area that had been disturbed due to construction, things like that, and used it quite extensively. But I learned over time a couple of things about it that that took me away from it for a variety of different reasons. But basically the carbon to nitrogen ratio on that product is really, really high. It's like 30-1, which isn't too far out of the range of what's good and what's not, but it's drawing in a lot of carbon and could sequester some of your nitrogen, slow down some of that decomposition that's in the soil and whatnot. So that's one thing. Low pH, I've seen it and heard anecdotally from folks that say that it affects seed germination and everything like that. I've not looked at the research closely enough, if there even is any, to be able to say that. So a lot of what you're hearing here is anecdotal, but the switch I made was going over to more of a compost material. So there's some caveats there too. These are generally higher in salts, and so that's a consideration as you're watering in new seedlings. Is you're flushing a lot of that through and into the seed bed, and you got to flush a lot of it through to get it all out of there for it to be beneficial. The other thing is the compost tend to be higher in P, so you might even be able to completely remove your starter FERT and be okay with that, because there's so much P in these compost products relative to the rate that you have to put them down and top dress them in at. So there's some advantages and disadvantages there. I do find that they hold water more evenly, better. They stay in place a lot better because they're a more dense material than like a peat moss would be.
Mm-hmm.
And you can find them in a variety of different settings. So, one of the easiest ones to find is they sell mushroom compost in like 3/4 cubic foot bags at the big box stores. So that's something where I would just be looking to do, like, say, 1/8 of an inch. So that's about half of a cubic yard. 13.5 cubic feet per 1,000 square feet, something like that. And again, the benefits of having nutrients available that are in that top dressing, and not so much so that it's going to smother it, but enough there. And then also on that product where we're talking about, carbon to nitrogen ratio, it's a lot lower. It's closer to like a 13 or 15-1. And that's a little bit on the lower side, but I'd rather have the nitrogen portion available and less so of the carbon when we're in a new seeding situation.
So what's the material look like? Because I know with compost, the other issue becomes, can you get anything that's fairly clean? Like sometimes it's got a bunch of bark in it or stuff that isn't, you want to find something that's a good material, but it's not always the easiest to do.
No, for sure. And I think that's another thing we talk about is sourcing, and this becomes an issue. So the stuff that comes out of the bag is very clean because it's got to go through bagging equipment to actually get to market, and stuff like what you're talking about, like sticks and other things like that, just wouldn't work with that. So I found that to be a really clean source. I think locally, in your specific area, like here, our municipality takes all of our biosolid waste and then treats that and then bulks it with mulch, turns that into compost. And so what you get, I wouldn't necessarily use it if I was going to go like real low, if I was going to go say below 1 inch, but anything above that, perfectly fine to use. So there's other places too. I know around here, and I've researched in other places around the country, is you can find finer grade material. So that's screened to say, I'd say you want to be down to like 1/2 inch screening, if at all possible. 3/4, you can get some bigger stuff through there, but that's if you're going inch and below. If you're say 1 inch plus or 1.5 inches plus, especially, that 3/4 and even maybe a 1 inch screen on your compost is going to be fine, for what you're trying to do. And again, you're not trying to cake this stuff on, inches thick. We're literally talking about just a covering to try and help you hold moisture and act more as a mulch than anything.
Yep. You could also screen it yourself, Ryan. Remember?
Oh, yeah. The Ryan Knorr human screening machine. I think that was. Didn't you used to work for Ringling Brothers, and then until they shut that down, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's where it came from.
Yeah.
Yep. So one of the other big topics, which thank you for talking about that there, because I don't think that there's been enough topics maybe about what can you use for top dressing, the benefits, the things that are cons as well. So that's good, something for me to think about too, and what I can maybe find for sourcing and things to try in the future.
Yeah, and I think that that's the biggest thing is if you're, let's say you are a year out from doing this, and just kind of doing some basic planning. And we talked about, sourcing of grass seed, but get to know the soil suppliers, the sand suppliers, the blenders, all these folks around town, and not just, you can go to the garden center a lot of times and they'll say, oh, I'll sell you this or I'll get you that. Um, I'll give you a great example. So there's a guy on the lawn Discord down in Georgia that uh, wanted to build a putting green in his old man's backyard, and suffice to say that he had top dressed with this material, this sandy, loamy soil that would looked really good, but it was like $40 a ton or something crazy like that. Which, for good sand, I would pay $40 a ton for really good sand. So didn't think too much of it. And then we started talking about this project of, hey, could I use that same material over here at my dad's house? And I was like, there's got to be something closer, better, whatever. So, here's me in Columbus, Ohio. I picked up the phone and called like 3 different people. I called a golf course guy that I know down there, and then I called a couple other people based on that phone call and got right to the source of the best sand that you can use down there to build that type of green or lawn area or whatever like that. So, sometimes you have to do that. Sometimes it's not on Google and it's not on the internet. I mean, a lot of this stuff really isn't. And it's just, word of mouth and phone calls and knowing who to ask. So I implore you, if you are thinking about doing this in the future, start building that network of resources now. Seed side, soil, top dressing, all that kind of stuff. Those are really good relationships to have, and just be able to sometimes just bounce a question off of, not even buy anything.
Yep.
So
Yeah, that's good advice for sure. That's what I found is the most difficult here is I've really have been wanting to do some sand work maybe this fall yet, but still finding the right sand and getting someone to actually talk to me has been a bit more difficult than I would have anticipated. So
gonna walk in there with a briefcase full of cash, Ryan.
yeah, I know. Well, I'm gonna have to find that cash first. But.
Yeah.
Let's talk about watering a bit because
Yeah.
another thing that people underestimate, as far as I think what I've seen personally in the comments and stuff, is they go through all this work with the renovation or overseeding, and they think that watering for a couple days is going to do it, and then it's like taking a medicine and then just forget. Like 5 days in, you're like, yeah, I don't want any more of this. I'm good. So
Yeah, I'm feeling better. And then, 2 days later, you're 10 times as sick, right? So, um, you have to make it easy on yourself, and you have to know yourself. So if you're not going to get up and go turn the water on at 6 o'clock in the morning for the first watering, don't do that. There's options that you have. So let's just talk about strategy for a second first. The light infrequent approach is tried and true, works all the time. No issues with it. Getting the seed bed dried out every now and again, that becomes the trick as you get down towards closer to it's time to start mowing and things like that. So kind of going through those first couple weeks, and it depends on species and everything like that. If you're getting tall fescue or ryegrass and you're getting grass up in 4 to 8 days, then you're going to get to that point quicker than you would if you've got bluegrass, where you might get seed up in as little as 7 days and possibly as many as 21 days. So in balancing that all out, and the rule of thumb I try to use is if we see puddles and things like that, we're probably a little bit too wet. At the time that we water, we should, it should look like it's almost mud. It's going to look wet. And if we're timing this out right, and so here in Columbus, Ohio, again, it's just what I know, but we can go maybe about 4 or 5 hours at the most. So typical, we're more closer to like 3 or 4. So here, a basic water schedule that I would have for an overseed or a new lawn renovation type of situation would be basically we'd start our first watering cycle about 8 a.m. and then we would wait. We'd try to get that base moisture worked in there, and that's going to take a little bit longer. So I wouldn't be every 3 hours from there. I'd wait until about 1, maybe 2 o'clock, and you're going to have to gauge this the first few days that you're out there. But say 1, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So we've let 4 or 5, maybe 6 hours pass. And then we're going to go and try and dial that in of every 3 hours. So usually like 1, 4, and 7. And I can feel pretty good about it. Sometimes that 7 o'clock doesn't even need to happen. So you can go more frequently, and it really depends on your soil type. It depends on the coverage that you have with your sprinklers, whether they're in ground or if they are above ground.
Yep.
But you've got some different options there too.
Yeah, I was going to say very similar to my climate here. It depends on when you do this, obviously, because if it's still pretty humid, that water can last you a lot longer period of time from my experience. So if we're talking about that, I mean, that's going to be much different than if you're in Denver trying to do this and there's no humidity at all, then the more frequent is going to be very important. But I think what I've seen is pretty similar schedule to what you were talking about. Sometimes, depending on the morning humidity, I can stretch it a bit into maybe that first watering in the morning goes to like maybe 10, something like when the dew has kind of come off.
Yeah.
But yeah, you just watch it. I mean, preferably if you can start this on a weekend and watch the first couple days, if you're not going to be able to be home, then that would be best. And that's what I think a lot of people also run into is they try to do this, but then, and maybe it's a little bit easier this year with more people being home, but in the past I saw so many people say, well, I'm not home in the afternoon, so I didn't water. I just let it go and then I turned it on at night. And then I'm like, well, that might work, but it's not the best scenario.
Yeah, and I think the other night's asking for a lot of trouble, and if a hose blows up, if you have above ground, or if a head gets stuck on your automatic in ground system, you're not going to see it. Now, granted, if you're at work or something like that and out of the home, you might not see it during the day either, but the likelihood of something like that happening or you being able to catch it seems far greater during the day than at night. So, for the above ground folks, if you're going to drag a hose and things like that, those battery operated valves are killer. I mean, they're, I don't know what they are now. I know several years ago, they were like probably $40, $50, and you can program a schedule in there. You set the clock, you tell it what time you want it to start, how long you want it to water, and off you go. So, and same thing with the automatic guys. There's features inside your controller, and I would really try to make sure you understand your controller and the features that it has to take control over that and make sure that you're able to do everything you can. I mean, I've seen a lot of people that have an automatic system that literally go out to the clock and are turning it on multiple times because they don't know that they can set multiple start times, or they don't know how to use a cycle and soak feature if they have that on their clock. So
I'm one of those guys, Ryan, because I like control. You know that.
Well, then you need to get the.
But I have the app. I have the app.
Okay,
so I do everything from my phone, but I am one of those people. Like I sit in my office and I'm like, okay, I want to do a syringe right now. So I just go to my manual, like press the zone, turn it on, watch it, make sure it comes on, and then I go to the next one.
You gotta live a little.
I know.
Let that technology work for you.
I know.
So, but anyhow, so the other part that I was going to say there too is if you're trying to judge the water, so the importance of watering, all that. Here's the best way that I found to judge. Like I said, after you've watered, you don't have streams of water trying to drain off your turf and things like that. You haven't overwatered. It's not puddled up in most spots, or generally speaking, might have a couple low spots or some small bird baths, things like that. But that's kind of dialing in the water. So it should be, sticky and tacky, but it shouldn't be like sopping mud wet. And so the key is if you're going to dry down, and it's going to be tough because it's probably not going to be even all the way across the yard. So you kind of have to make a little bit of a judgment call here. But the easiest way to tell is it should still be moist, and you should still be able to push your thumb in and not have a bunch of soil pool off on your thumb. That's when it's still too wet and you don't need to water yet. So I should be able to make an indentation with my thumb, and it stays put like a piece of modeling clay, something like that. The other trick or tip you can try and use is either take a pocket knife or take a key on your key ring, stick it in like the top inch or so of soil, and if you pull it back out, you can push it in no problem because it's moist and soft enough that you can pull it back out and there's no mud sticking to it. That's a good indicator too. So that's when you know that you're right there, and then you probably want to schedule your next watering cycle right after that. So
Yeah, and from my experience, I just think don't overthink it too much. Like
Yeah,
don't
yeah,
get too crazy on, oh, I went 7 minutes today and I should have went 9, or like, you know what I mean?
yeah.
Like it's not that crazy to where you're gonna still have good results, but just don't decide not to water. Essentially, is the main thing.
Yeah, and the other thing too is kind of playing the rain. So if you do have a battery operated valve on your hose, knowing that, hey, I need to go out there and just turn the water off to the spigot so it doesn't kick on. Or if you don't have a rain sensor on your controller, that you're enabling the rain hold so it doesn't water for those days. So take that into account as well. Hopefully you do get some rain and you can make it happen. But if you're all irrigation all the time, yeah, just like you said, be vigilant, use common sense.
Yep. In terms of then training, it to start going less frequent, well, you talked about that just for a second, a little bit ago there, but it kind of depends on grass type. And I was telling my neighbor this the other day when we were talking about it too, because I was like, if we get some ryegrass going in there, I mean, I've seen ryegrass ready to mow at day 13 or 14. It just depends like what your conditions are. But so in terms of that and trying to get to that point, how do people figure out when to transition that watering to not as much of the infrequency, but a little heavier doses, a little less often?
Yeah, absolutely. So, deeper and infrequent. So I always kind of judge it by what you just said, the mowing. So as we feel like we're nearing that stage where we're ready to put the first mow on, I'm trying to dry that out for, a day or so. I don't want to have soil conditions that are super dry. They're going to stress the new grass out and the seedlings and whatnot. I also don't want to have soil that's so wet that we're going to have tire tracks that we're putting in our newly graded, and repaired and leveled lawn. So again, you can test that out and kind of proof your theory a little bit, in the days leading up to that. You can kind of eyeball it and say, okay, it looks like, we're going to be mowing sometime in the next week, and you start doing those experiments where you shut the water off for longer, let it go a little bit longer, and understand too, as those plants mature and as they get bigger, they're going to use more water. So in the beginning, we're just trying to create a moist and ripe environment for them to be able to establish and get going. And as that process transitions into, now we're pushing out, 3 and 4 and 5 leaves at a time, that is when we start using up way more water resources than what we have in those first couple of weeks. And so that's where that transition needs to come. And again, kind of planning ahead and thinking about when you're going to mow and how often you're going to have to mow, you might push it and balance out the weather and things like that. So we might want to mow it when it's 95 degrees, but we also need to water it when it's 95 degrees. So mowing on the back end of a heat wave when we've watered maybe a little bit more to keep things going, probably not good because we could create tire track issues or something like that.
That's why I
So
really like those, and I've shown this quite a bit on my channel. It depends on what kind of area you're dealing with. It's not for everybody, but it's why I really like those manual reel mowers at the beginning, like the cheap ones. If it's dialed in well, cutting clean, and it's so light that you don't have to do any turnaround, like you get to the end of a pass, pick it up, move it. I really like using those in that scenario. It's not for everyone, obviously, but
no, and you're right. It's not for everybody, but I do agree. I think there's some validity to that where it's the lightest weight thing you can do. I mean, unless you're going to go out there and the quality of cuts absolutely abysmal, so please don't do this. But take like a weed whacker out there, and not even touch the actual surface of the soil other than where your feet go. I do think that's got some merit to it. So if people are willing to give that a shot, it's definitely a way to get it cultured in a little bit better, at least to start. At some point if you're gonna be more higher cut, you definitely want that suction that you get from a rotary mower. But at least in the beginning, first couple mows, I can see where that would be an effective and valuable tool.
so how do people make a decision on when to start mowing? That is another big question.
So I'm looking at a couple of things. Well, I'll say three things. First and foremost, overall turf health. If we've gone through a really, really hot stretch or something like that, or we're leading into a super hot stretch, those are things that are dry, humid, whatever it might be. And at some point you got to mow your grass, but you can kind of know what the extremes are in your local area and what you need to do, and maybe where you'd pump the brakes and where you can press the gas. But so overall turf health is one. If there's any other pests that I'm seeing, particularly disease and things like that in a new seeding situation, would be things I would be looking at. And then beyond that, the other two things would be density. So do I have a bunch of, patchy areas that maybe haven't come in yet or a little bit slower on the take, that type of thing. That would be something where I'd like it to be as even as it possibly can be, but knowing that it's very seldom that we get, a great catch across 95+% all at once. You got to really have things dialed in and can have a lot of things go your way to do that. So density too. So if we're above, say, 70%, and I know we mentioned the Canapeo app, in the last one, that's a good tool to kind of use and quantify that for you if you're not sure. And then lastly, height. So if we're trying to maintain this lawn at sub 1 inch, then I better not let it get more than like 1.5 inches or so before we start doing that first mowing. And that might mean waiting a little bit longer to build some density. That might mean that we have to mow over some less dense areas to get started with, and then fill those areas in with additional seed and that sort of thing. But I'm maybe no more than twice your height of cut, your desired height of cut, below, say, 3 inches and below. So if it was 3, I wouldn't let it get more than 6. And if you were your intended height of cut was 3/4 of an inch, I wouldn't let it get above 1.5 inches before you start mowing. So that's sort of good rule of thumb. If you're one of those people that mows at 3+ inches, I mean, that's great and everything. But 6 inches is about the max. So, and understand too, the 1/3 rule. So don't go from 6 down to 3 in one shot. Like that's a big no-no. The 1/3 rule is still in effect even on new seedlings, and especially so on new seedlings because they're young, they're juvenile plants, and not ready to take the rigors of that type of a cutting situation. So that would be the other thing is start high, work your way down as you go, and don't be afraid to lower the mower as you get going, but definitely give it 2 and 3 and maybe even 4 mows at a time on a height before you go down to the next step. Especially if you're on a rotary mower, it's a little bit easier to dial in if you're on a reel.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's what I've pretty much found. That's why I like that ryegrass, because I get mowing very quickly, and especially if I'm going to keep it under 1 inch, I'm like, yes, like 10 days in, let's mow.
Yeah, you're not on the wagon too long. You fall off pretty quick. Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Now, I did a video on this as part of my renovation last year, and Ryan helped me a lot with this. But seeding on slopes is something that also can get very interesting. And I have a sloped area on the north side of my house that when we get some decent storms, you will definitely see the water running down to the low point, and it kind of pools down there. So I was seeding and I saw some storms coming, and I was like, oh man, I don't know. Should I let this ride? What should I do? And he was like, nope, you got to get this blanket and you've got to get it down today. And so I ended up finding one, but we're talking about the Futera netless is what I used last year.
Yep.
And it's kind of like I don't know, like a wood fibers that they sort of weave together. And what happens is then when it gets wet, it like sucks down to your soil and actually just holds everything there. And I can't remember the stats on how much water it can withstand, but it's pretty crazy when I looked at some of the stats and tests that they had done. So
yeah, it's a great tool. I mean, I remember you sending me pictures, and I can't remember did you do a follow-up video to kind of show the results after? I know it's been sort of like seen. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So, I mean, you tell me, you used it in probably the most extreme situation. I've used it in areas, that have been either, seeded late in the season where we need some additional production, or in areas, some slopes, some hillsides, but I use it in a little bit different situations than what you do. So did you have any issues at all with it, washing out?
And I didn't have any issues with it washing out at all. We had quite a bit of rain, a couple of major storms with like more than a couple inches at a time that happened, and I didn't have anything major wash out. It was awesome. But the only thing that I did find was, and this might have just been application wise and me being a rookie at it, but I found a few areas that sort of looked like a bubble afterwards, like they didn't get fully sucked down to the ground. So then I had grass
Mm,
growing under those actually much better because it was getting a little more air and heat in that space.
hmm.
But so that was the only thing. I started removing some of those areas over time and just letting that grass grow up. But everything now is uniform and looks fine. But
No, that's good. I mean, that's again, it's an insurance policy, right? Because if you're seeding with whatever, if you're seeding with grass seed that is going to cost you, let's just say it's $10 per 1,000 square feet, and you would probably, I mean, you can speak to your particular situation best, but if you did that, 4 or 5 times over and only had half of it take, that's a pretty bad situation to be in versus a one and done,
yep.
right? And that's where it goes into, you lose. It's not just like you can seed anytime you want. You have a window to do it in. So
Hmm.
making the most of that weather window is absolutely crucial.
And
So
that happened to me too because I did not use any covering out on the little street section that I renoed last year at the pretty much the same time. Ended up seeding it 3 times, and it didn't.
you
You get too late, like you said, and then this spring I was dealing with more weeds than usual coming in and having to do some sort of work on the spring side. Whereas the other one that I used that blanket on, I was already mowing like a thick turf by the end of the fall.
I'm sorry I made it too easy on you. I
I
really
know.
do apologize. I know you like to beat yourself up and
I know.
really make it difficult, but it's okay. Sometimes it's good to just knock one out of the park and trot around the bases and just be done.
Yep.
Go back to the dugout, sit down, wait for your next AB. So, hey,
Yeah.
by the way, speaking of that, I do have to get this in, and it was a great segue. So, go Tribe! Tough night for your Twinkies last night.
Yeah, I was
So,
going to ask you about have you been watching any of this baseball with
oh,
these
I
cardboard
watched
cutouts?
the cardboard cutout thing is weird. I don't know. I mean, we can definitely talk more sports maybe on a future one, but I had to get in there about my guy Shane Bieber carving up the Twins lineup like a butcher last night.
Yeah,
That was
I know. I actually didn't catch that game, but I get the
uh,
little alerts on my phone. I did watch the game a couple this week. But yeah, the cardboard thing
nice.
is weird, and hockey starts this weekend.
Hockey does start, so that'll be
And
interesting to see.
I watched an exhibition game from a couple days ago, and they're not doing the cardboard thing, which is good. But when someone scores a goal and there's no one cheering, it's a bit not like weird. So
Yeah, it's like very very low level junior hockey or rec hockey or something like that. But
yeah, it reminded me of the beer league that I played in. Like
I
when
know I
when they're
well the beer. Oh gosh, yeah. There probably was a little bit of hooting and hollering, I imagine, going on with that. But
yeah.
so I'm I had to get that in there because it's nice to see sports coming back. It's been great to have grass and turf and stuff as the outlet that really never left. But it's good that we can weave some of those in. It always helps when a Cleveland team beats a Minnesota team.
Yeah.
I feel better. I know I do. So
I saw one
but,
comment from last episode that said Browns versus Vikings in the Super Bowl question mark and then like ha 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 for like an entire, major filling of the comment section there. So there's a lot of laughter about that.
Baker Mayfield 2020.
Yeah.
Get it. So back to this stuff, the seeding of slopes. One other tip that could help if you have if you're going to go the blanket route, even if you're not, it can help. But I would recommend, one or both of these things is if you can go to like Home Depot, any of the big box, and get that plastic like paver edging stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually saw this at a golf course here. They recently tweeted this out, and it really makes sense about nailing that stuff in the ground. It's only an inch or so wide, so it's not going to impact if you've got a seed area above the slope that you're trying to get in, or even if you have existing, you have a little bit of dieback or a little bit of area that you have to reseed after. But you pound this stuff in to the ground with just some 5-6 inch nails, and you leave it there, and it acts as a baffle. So if you've got water that's sort of sweeping across your lawn and going to go downhill, this baffles and slows that water down so that you have less velocity going down the hill, at least to start, and less volume going down the hill, at least to start. So again, things like that help of how you manage water that's going into that area just as much as the area itself. So take that under advisement as well.
Okay. And I think the other thing, I have used some of those other straw type blankets in like a really large yard situation. The couple acres that my friend was doing, he had kind of a sloped area. And we have used those. They did work. I mean, not nearly like the Futera does, but the cost of the Futera is also very high compared to the other straws. So
yeah, I want to say, I just did this a little while ago, but I want to say you're like 10 cents a square foot on the straw, like the netted straw blankets that you can get at a big box. And then the Futura, I want to say that stuff. You remember what you paid? I want to say it was about $75, something like that. Anyhow, yeah, you're almost double there. So you're about 13 to 15 cents a square foot on the Futura. So it does add up. And again, those are special situations that you don't want to have to do it again. Nobody wants to have to walk up on the side of the hill and seed and fertilize and take care of all this stuff. So get it in, get it done right, and you'll be a lot happier in the end.
Yeah, and the question too was, where can you get that? Because I had a bit of difficulty in finding the Futera. So usually like a landscape supply, like somewhere where a landscape company goes to get, their rock borders or their mulch or any of that stuff that might have like an erosion control type of thing.
Exactly. You'll see a supply house like that in most major and mid-sized cities just because of highway projects, roads, schools, all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of erosion control stuff that goes into that. And so they'll generally carry that. And then Site One also carries it. I don't think they stock it nearly everywhere, but they can get it, but you're gonna pay some markup on it from Site One. So
okay, there's I know we're already at like an hour and 20 minutes, but I think
so we can.
I got two more
right,
questions that I want to get to for sure, and then maybe we'll move our like after renovation care, like what you should do going into the rest of the season to the next episode. But okay, so the first question is a project that I'm maybe possibly working on in a large yard situation out in the country. And this guy has some pretty good equipment like a skid steer and probably going to Harley rake an area that's going to smooth everything out. But then what would be your sort of steps going forward after that in terms of getting the seed down? And, in a large situation, you do some of that stuff, obviously, with sports turf, but you have a lot different equipment that you can use.
Yeah. So a typical situation like that, you could do a couple of things. One would be just a general slice or drill seeder that you would see commonly like a rental yard or something like that you put on the back of a tractor. I know they make them for skid steers as well for the front of them. And so those are a lot easier to control rate. And, also you can make sure that you're properly calibrated over a much smaller area. So, the width of the seeder, and you make one pass and you can kind of tell that you're on your rate versus, the other direction you can go would be getting like a large 3-point fertilizer spreader for the back of a tractor and just spreading your seed out. Now, I'd only recommend doing that if it was like a tall fescue or ryegrass, just because those are bigger seeded varieties and they can handle just, very minimal soil contact and be still effective at germinating an establishment. With bluegrass, which, it's possible that you're doing that on a large lawn, definitely would only go with the slicer, the drill seeder, and I'd be going at half a rate in two separate directions too. So, and I'd really do that. It's hard to get, some of the, like say tall fescue, if we're on bare ground and we're seeding 8 to 12 pounds per 1,000 square feet, you can't get that out of a slice seeder. You're going to have to go two directions in order to do that. So going on the 45-degree angle, that's a really key piece.
So if that soil, after they actually did the cultivation part, if it's not set up that well in terms of, it's not packed down, what would you do there? Would you consider maybe like rolling it at first or something to kind of get the seed bed?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would do a couple of things in an ideal world, and even if not. So we'll talk about ideal and practical. Ideal world, we're going to take a drag mat, so it could be anything from a piece of chain link fence, which is going to be a little bit rougher grade versus, a true, the square steel drag mats, the flex mats that, you can get from different sites. I'm not sure if you offer one on your store, but those are really nice to kind of smooth out areas like that have been hardly raked, that you're just trying to smooth out some minor imperfections and get your grade as smooth and as even as possible. Not necessarily level, but smooth and even. And so if you did that, just going over it with a what we would call a proof roll, right? So we can use our tires, we can use a pull behind roll or something like that, just to set the soil up. If you have irrigation, I'd run the irrigation ahead of that, just to get yourself a little bit of moisture to pack stuff down, and then go ahead and seed into that. Now, if you don't have irrigation and you're doing it in a dry soil, I mean, I've done the same thing where we've Harley raked and then like either just pull the drag mat, or we've laser graded behind that on soil, and then taken without irrigation, just taking the seeder right over top of that. The thing you got to watch about the irrigation versus the seeder is you don't want to do it like right afterwards, because all that seed's going to stick to your rear roller on that seeder.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's okay to leave it dry. It's not going to hurt anything. And the only thing you might have to do, and this is what I find a lot of times, is if you have irrigation and you've got heads in the ground, or if you got some type of obstruction or whatever, and the seeder's got to lift up or drive around it or something like that, those are areas I would go back with a leaf rake and just leaf rake those in. And I typically will take a leaf rake and flip it over so the tines are facing up, and just kind of pull that seed in rather than put the tines down in and drag the seed. And I might move and disrupt some of that coverage that we have. So again, just little things like that of screwing a lot of stuff up over the years and learning the hard way. So
let's say I would assume probably he would be looking more at like a tall fescue, because it's not going to be a huge irrigated, it's going to be non-irrigated, just natural area. But so after let's say we broadcast that down, then what would be after that in terms of any covering? I mean, you could probably do with like maybe like a straw or something kind of out across everything, but
if it were me and I were going to spec it in a professional situation, I would have, I would seed it with whatever means you want to, whether that be the broadcast spreader, or, being a little bit more precise and using a slit seeder. That said, once that's all done and you've got all your pre-plant stuff down, so if you're going to do tenacity, if you're going to do starter, all that stuff down, the last step I would have somebody do, and I would pay somebody to come in and do this, is hydromulch it.
okay.
And again, you're talking about layers of protection and insurance and things like that. If I've got a large lawn and I've seeded an acre and I've spent at that point probably close to $1,000 in material, rentals, whatever I might have into it, I want to make sure it works. So to spend and say, hey, most hydro seeding contractors, on the low end, just to come out and mulch it, you're going to be 10 cents maybe. They might charge you more if it's a smaller job or something like that, but 10 cents a square foot, going up to say 25 cents a square foot. But again, it's that added insurance policy, and you're going to have far better luck than you would by not doing anything at all. For sure, you're gonna help out with washouts and things like that initially, and then also help to hold moisture in when you do have a rainfall event. It's not just gone in a day and you're sitting there baking out again. So some of those same folks will offer straw blowing services. If you really want to do that, it might save you a little bit of money, but you're going to have some cleanup and some other things to do too. So, but yeah,
that's good advice there. I think, something I may get into in the future myself in terms of some of these areas that I might have going on in the future. So I'm just kind of thinking about all of that now, but it sounds kind of fun to me. So you know how this goes.
Hey, there's always something else to do. But
last question here is a question that I saw the last couple days. We've got probably in the forecast at least a week, maybe. I was looking at the 14-day yesterday, about quite a bit cooler temperatures coming up than maybe would be normal for August or beginning of August. Should someone consider seeding or their project, let's say they're in the renovation and they're ready to go, what's your idea there on maybe considering going for it now, and what could possibly be a reason to wait?
Based on the forecasts that I've seen through the Midwest, I would feel comfortable in going ahead with it. If you're, things to consider are, if you're unirrigated, are you going to be able to keep up with watering? Other things would be, if there is a spike in temperatures or something like that, are you prepared to either just accept the losses or apply a fungicide, to prevent, some of the issues that we might have with hotter and or wetter conditions. So those would be the trade-offs I'd be looking at. But if it were me, if you were asking me today and recommending it to somebody, I would go for it. Like we seem to be in a pretty good spot right now. I'll probably be wrong and people will come up and blast me, but I tend to be on the aggressive side, knowing that and you can speak to this, and I know time is of the essence in our podcast because we're getting down to the end here and we got to wrap it up, but time is of the essence. The longer you wait, the window closes faster and faster each day that you do wait. So taking advantage of this and dealing with some of the issues you might encounter on the front end are far, far and away more easy to deal with and recover from than if you wait too long and you can't make it hotter, you can't make it sunny, longer, sun longer in the day, all that kind of stuff. So
that's something that I think people forget about too, which I've noticed the last, couple weeks even, is the sun changing so much, losing daylight. So if you're doing an area where right now maybe it's very sunny, like my front yard is pretty sunny, but then it's also as the sun gets less and less throughout the year, that gets more, more and more shady. And those are things that it's not just about the temperature at that point. So,
no doubt. And I'll send you a slide that we can throw up here on the TurfCast about just here in Columbus what the waning of light looked like. I kind of modeled it last year for some of the Bermuda grass fields we have here, just to show people that it's 90 degrees in October, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we're still photosynthesizing and getting as much energy from the sun as we would in, say, June or July. Mm-hmm. So pretty interesting to look at and see how that degrades, over time. And it's not always relative to temperature or climate.
Yeah, so it's happened, I think, the last couple of years for me too, where it seems like winter, not winter necessarily like snow and all that, but colder temperatures have come a little earlier to where my year almost ended around the beginning of November, which sometimes it can go much longer. So that's part of it. If I could get that seed going right now and have a yard in and all that, then that'd be nice. And also, if it's going to be in the 70s, I saw a low of 52 coming for Monday. I might sleep in my shed. I'm thinking about
it. Some people are going to say that you're weird, Ryan. I don't think you're weird.
I mean, I can
in a safe space here.
I can take all the smells and all. It's fine. So.
Yeah, I mean, some people like sleeping around 2-cycle oil and gasoline. I mean, it's just it's a thing.
Yep. Oh, man. Well, I think for today we covered that as well as we can. I think there's more to talk about in terms of the after program. Once you're mowing, what should your fertilizer program look like? How do you get into that first winter season? But I think for next week, that'd be something to talk about.
Oh, we will definitely dig in. But again, I'm glad these are, I wouldn't say that they're running long. I'd say that they're trying to make it as complete as we can be, right? And try to balance out all that information that you can't get in a 10-minute YouTube video. But really appreciate it, the time again, and we'll try it again next week, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think we're going to try to maybe transition this to just more of the audio thing, because an hour and 30 long, for video. And I had some people ask me, can you cut that up into 10-minute segments or something on each topic? I would love to be able to do that, but in terms of me making 2 other 15-minute videos every week for my normal channel stuff, it gets to be a bit much. So we'll see. I think even just going through and having timestamps would be nice.
Yeah, timestamps would be perfect. So yeah, we can definitely work on it. We're here to evolve it and grow it and everything like that. But the most important part, and I'll speak for both of us, is just the information and getting that out to people that need it and want, correct and proper information, and do with it what they will. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, enjoy the rest of your day, Ryan. And thanks again for chatting about this.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You as well, Ryan. And get that sleeping bag ready for the shed. Okay.
I will.
All right. Take it easy.
Talk to you later.